as a reading specialist, and my professors were amazing. And we started talking about why kids didn't like to read. And I was the only male in the entire program, the only non-elementary school teacher in the entire program. And I started mentioning about my love for comics, and they're like, "Hey, go for it. Like, what?" And so I started doing research, and so I wrote my master's paper on that. And then I just started, doing that kind of a thing. And now we, like you and Shveta, we get to travel all over the place and do professional in-services, and it's been a really great experience.
And thank you, Tim, for that. So I'm going to toss it over to Shveta to talk a little bit about her background.
Thanks, Michael. I'm so happy to be here with both of you. Yeah, I am Shveta Miller. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I also started out high school teaching. I was an English teacher in New York City public schools, and that was my first taste of not just teaching with graphic novels and comics, but actually becoming a reader and fan of them myself. So I came to it through my teaching and had that experience of looking at these texts critically for the first time alongside my students who were doing that for the first time. And I just saw so many incredible benefits, many that were surprising to me, that went far beyond just developing critical reading skills, but also just the social emotional impact that it was having on students, along with boosting their confidence to just be critically engaged citizens. So since then, I've spent about a decade as an instructional coach and an instructional designer, presenting PD on various topics related to literacy and instruction. And now I'm sad to say I am out of the classroom and out of school buildings and accepted a position at the State Department of Ed in my home state here of Oregon. But hoping that access to statewide systems will help me continue to advocate for all kinds of literacy.
Thank you for that, Shveta. Thank you for, sorry, I'm still getting used to this whole system here, so I apologize if it's a little glitchy here. I'm trying to work in my way through how all this kind of works and where to put us on the screen so we're not blocking anything. Okay, so these are some of the questions that we discussed bringing up during our panel. And of course, we'll be throwing it to audience questions towards the end. But first, I guess the first question I would ask is, what inspired each of you to decide to write books about teaching with comics? You taught with comics, and then, a lot of us have practice, as educators, we build out a practice over the course of our career. But not as many of us decide to share those ideas and take on the Herculean task of writing an entire book about it. So what did each of you decide, what made you decide to do this? I'll start with Shveta for that question. So.
Sure, thanks. I know my path is probably a lot different than Tim, so this is going to be exciting to hear where we both came to this, as you say, Herculean task of putting it all in a book, much less an article. My story started with, I was new to Twitter, to edu Twitter, and was starting to follow a lot of leaders and thinkers, thought leaders in education, favorite bloggers, and all of that. And I was following Cult of Pedagogy, Jennifer Gonzalez, and she had posted one of her older articles on teaching with comics and graphic novels. And I think this was in 2018. And I simply wrote a thoughtful comment about it, using my own experience as a teacher. And I think the post was my comment was about the surprising benefits it had on my students, especially those dealing with trauma in their lives, and how our experience studying Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis really helped them tell stories from their own lives that they never had the confidence or tools to tell before, using just words, using just prose, or whatever writing forms they had been exposed to in school. And so all of these different kinds of stories came out using all these different tools and modalities. the effect that it had, not just on them as readers and writers and storytellers, but that there was also this sort of healing component. Anyway, somehow I managed to put that all in a 160 character tweet, responding to Jennifer Gonzalez's post. And I still just credit her with the book that I wrote, because she engaged back with me over DMs to learn more about that. And she said, there's a great article here. Will you write this for my site? So I said, great, wow, I'm glad I joined Twitter 1 week in and I get to contribute to one of my favorite teacher blogs. So then started the long process of trying to put all of that experience of teaching comics into a blog post. And I just had so much material, and it was getting longer and longer. And we ended up condensing it down into something more appropriate for her blog. But she's the one who said, I'd like you to take all of that stuff we're leaving out and put it in a book. And I said, oh, right. Yeah, I'll get right on that. It's out of my full-time teaching job and my consulting on the side and the family I'm raising and all of that. So I don't quite remember, honestly, Michael, what happened about 6 months after that. I did some casual surfing online for different publishers, education publishers. I'm sure Tim and I probably looked at some of the same ones to just see what their submissions guidelines were like. And Tim maybe can say this as well. It was pretty daunting that a lot of them basically want you to write the book before they'll consider it. Like the pitch itself, you have to have quite a lot of it written already. So it's just like, scroll, skip. But then I came across another site, another publisher, the Hack Learning team from Times 10 Publications. And they had a much more modest expectation for submissions. And I was already a fan of the hacking series for teachers. And in fact, Jennifer Gonzalez from Cult of Pedagogy, who kind of got me started on this idea, had published the first book in the Hack Learning series with Mark Barnes, the founder of that Times 10 Publications company. So it just all seemed to all fall into place. They had a very reasonable submissions guideline. And I had all of this content and ideas that just got risen to the surface of my brain from writing that article for Jen, that I wanted to get it out there. I didn't want to have done all of that thinking and digging through all my old student work and thinking back on the impact it had on all these different students and on my own teaching, all of that reflective work and looking back and articulating it in writing. I knew that there was an audience for that based on the feedback I got from the blog post and the article and the podcast. And so I knew I wanted to get this out there in an expedient way, in a way that, there was already a built-in audience like the Hack Learning series has. And there was a structure to how that series is written, how those books are written. They all follow the same format. So it really felt like something doable and something worthwhile to continue to speak to that community that I was now engaging with through the Cult of Pedagogy website. It's a long story. I'm really excited to hear Tim's experience with that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen because I'm having a heck of a time trying to figure out where to put us on the screen. So I'm gonna stop sharing. We'll come back to the PowerPoint at the end to share out, contact information, but just so that we're all on the screen together at the same time here in the webinar, I'm gonna stop the share and I thought I stopped the share. Stop the share. Thank you. There we go. Okay. So everybody can see everybody and we're all together in a big happy family. So Tim, same question for you. What inspired you to decide to you were interesting about Tim's process. If you know him and you follow him on social media, he was very candid and open about the process of writing his book. He kept us up to date on all the steps from even back when you were pitching it to different publishers. So what made you decide to take that leap? And also, in addition, what made you decide to share that process with the people that have been following you all this time?
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures of me like this on social media through that whole process. And I loved how Shveta said about the healing process with the comics and everything. That's a big part of everything that we do. For me, it was, I had a staff developer who a lot of people probably know, we're talking about social media, AJ Giuliani, who worked in my building, and he was a staff developer back in the day. And he encouraged me. He heard some of the things I was doing in my classroom. He's like, "Hey, you need to have like a blog." And like, I had no idea what Twitter was. I had never had MySpace or Facebook, any of that stuff. And I was like, no, that's like what the millennials do. Like, I don't want to brag. Like, I don't feel comfortable with that. I'm really introverted. And then another older teacher in my department, who I really look up to, was like, no, man, you got to start sharing. And so I did. And then, wouldn't you know it, once I started sharing, and then I had a website, all these little things. And then I had like that year, like us, all of us here, we are teachers. Like, that's who we are. And I had that year where I resigned as department chair. I was ready to walk out as a teacher. And of course, it had nothing to do with my students. It was all that other stuff. I won't get into details because I don't want to get fired. And I actually do love the district where I work. But I don't know how it worked. The stars aligned. And an editor from PBS had come across me on social media. And she asked me if I would write a blog post for them. And I was like, hell yeah. And so I did. And literally the day that I resigned as department chair, she texted me that the article had gone live. And I went out with dinner with my family, and I cried, and it was just such a powerful moment. And then all of a sudden I started getting in contact with folks like you, Michael, and then Shveta and I have worked together, and then educators from around the world. And all of a sudden I had that permission that okay, what I'm doing does matter. And so whenever I love working with colleges, and I talk to a lot of education students, what education really is. And we talk about, tests, and we talk about all these kinds of things. But when we can share our own personal passions in the classroom, how empowering that is. And we really do need to inspire that next generation of teachers. And so that's how I got involved. And then why I did it is, like, everybody told me, like, you have to write a book. My students and my family and other people. And then on the other side of that, I realized there was a wall that was put up between me and some opportunities, because as much as we, being an author is a lot of different things, but if you don't have that book, like when you have that book, people still really value that as a tangible thing. And all of a sudden you have a lot more credibility. And so I've had a lot more doors open for me, where I've worked with departments of education and the U.S. State Department, and I've worked with now a lot of different publishers, and I'm hired to come out and do these different things. And I'm not doing anything different than I did before I had the book. But now that I have the book, it just seems to have that added weight to it. And I wish we weren't like that, because all the blog posts and the social medias and all the different ways that we can publish now, but that is still such a reality of where we are. And then the other side of that is just the idea of just, I want to allow other teachers to be the kind of teacher that I needed when I was a kid, and that my own children, my 3 kids, need now. And so for me, and I know that's like another question coming up, but the biggest piece of this book is, hopefully, like Shveta and I and everybody in the movement here, we can give teachers that permission to do these things.
Right. Thank you. So, and I will actually, let's move to that idea. And Tim, you can actually continue to speak on that. That would be our next question: is what need do you think that your books fulfill in the educational community, and how successful so far do each of you feel you are in actually reaching that goal, or find a need, fill a need kind of situation? So Tim, since you already started kind of talking about it, why don't you keep that thought going?
Okay. So yeah, it's that permission piece. And it was funny because I went to a Pennsylvania Department of Education conference, and I presented at it, and I met the Secretary of Education for the state. Turned out like he was a big old nerd, and his kids loved to read, but he never really even thought about the educational process with all this. And then he came out to visit my classroom at the beginning of the school year a couple of years ago. It was a great experience, and it was just all of a sudden now, like, what we did matters. So yeah, it's the comics piece, but it's also this idea that as educators, there's so much negativity out there. And so I love being able to be a part of helping to control that conversation about what really goes on in our classrooms. And I get to share what my students do, and I get to share what my own children do, those sorts of things. And I'm always still smacked in the face sometimes with comics aren't real books, and comics don't equal literacy. And I'm like, it's been such an uphill battle. It's gotten easier, but still there's times where I just find doors slammed in my face, because in the United States, we still have this hang up on comics as literacy. And we know in all this, and that's a whole nother presentation, but the educational value, the visual literacy, the 21st hypertext reading, like all those sorts of things that we need. And so I think just that idea of, again, going back to permission, and not to keep repeating myself, but really inspiring that next generation of teachers. And in terms of, is it successful or not? This is what's driving me nuts, because I haven't gotten my first royalty check. So I don't know. I'm hoping a lot of people have bought the book, and people have been very kind and share about it on social media. And that is still such a humbling experience. But I didn't write the book to make $1 million. There's no movie deal in all this. It's just, again, it's that idea just to kind of help other people in this whole conversation that we're having. Thank
you, Tim. A lot of interesting stuff there. And I'm sure you're going to do really well on your first royalty check. I think that's a foregone conclusion because of the support that you have and the network you've built already. So fingers crossed for you on that one. Shveta, same question. Your book, it was part of a series, the hacking series. Tim and I actually are both in your book, if I remember correctly, along with a number of other educators that he and I have both crossed paths with and worked with. So is your answer, how does your answer differ in that, but part of what you were doing was compiling other people's strategies as well. So does that contribute to the need you think that your book is fulfilling, in addition to, your own strategies that you incorporated?
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for that memory of what the book is, and that you're both in it, and along with a lot of other experts out there. And I think when I was researching publishers and getting serious about the idea of taking all of that material I had written for the blog, and still getting it out there in some way, I'm the type of reader, and I'm the type of teacher in professional learning where I don't want to just be given stuff I already know. Has to build on something in a really special and unique and interesting way. I don't want to just sit through, repeated learning. There are elements of that, obviously, where it makes sense. Sometimes if it's a type of learning that needs to be very collaborative, like even if it's the same content I've learned and engaged with deeply, there's always a benefit from, at least I'm learning it with different people this time, and I can see it from other points of view. And but I was just really sensitive to the fact that we're in a place right now in the world of teaching with comics where there are a lot of books out there. There are a lot of experts. There are a lot of resources. And so I really wanted to make sure I was adding value to that, and not, sort of repeating what was already out there. And so when I thought about the strategies I was really using and really wanted to showcase, they were a lot of my colleagues' strategies, some of these other experts. So I thought of myself as a little bit of a curator in terms of what is out there, where not all of these people are going to write their own books. Not all of these people have a web presence, or the things that they do talk about when they're in panels aren't necessarily the things that I find of real value in terms of what they've contributed or what I've used from them. So it was kind of a way to compile a lot of what's already out there, along with my own strategies and research, and present something new for the field. And the focus ended up being, when I looked at all of the things that I had, was really on this, like the subtitle says, teaching higher level thinking using visual storytelling. Whereas a lot of the other valuable resources out there and books on teaching with comics fill a need and a gap for maybe introducing the idea of visual literacy to teachers, or using it in a specific subject area like literacy, or using it for specific student population like striving readers or language learners. Whereas this was supposed to be more on, okay, it's assuming, I was publishing during a time where there was this wealth of resources and books. So it was assuming some sort of baseline. Yeah, people teach with comics and graphic novels. Yeah, they're the most purchased books in middle grade. Oh yeah, librarians say they're the ones that get checked out the most. Like there was this base understanding that there's something to using these in the classroom. So I wanted to focus the book on strategies for, it's not just about bridging readers, bridging from non-reading to traditional canonical difficult prose texts, dense texts, that you can add that rigor and higher level learning, DOK 3, 4, depth of knowledge to these texts. So that's sort of the theme of it, that sort of I wanted to put out into that space where there was already so many great resources. And in terms of results or return on investment, I think that, like Tim said, you don't write books on teaching to make $1 million. There's no movie deal down the line, but it's more of a, like Tim said, it's kind of a credibility piece. It gets you in the room. It gets you invited to spaces where decisions are being made about curriculum, about instructional practices and high leverage moves. And really the most rewarding for me is just individual readers, individual teachers who have used the book, and reaching out to me personally on social media or through my website to just talk about some of the ideas they've tried. I've had a lot of different jobs in education, and my favorite thing to do by far is to just partner one-on-one with teachers as an instructional coach. So if the book has helped me do that with teachers that I wouldn't have been able to connect with because they're not in my district, they're not in my state, and they're all over the world actually, and to just be able to have conversation over email or FaceTime and talk about, oh, you use this strategy in your class. Well, how did it work with that population in that part of the world, in your grade level, in your content area? So for that, I feel like it's doing what it was intended to do.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, what I can say, having seen both of your books, read both of your books, is that the complexity of the strategies being offered is far and away so further evolved from when I first started teaching in some 20 years ago. As like many, I'm sure both of you, I know for sure you, Tim, and I'm sure a lot of people watching, we grew up on comics, right? In the 80s and 90s, reading these books, and we became adults and teachers, and we decided, hey, we liked reading them, we want to teach them. When I first started out, and this is probably true both of you as well, there was no resources available for how to do this. So I would go to a PD or I would buy a book and it would be a list. Here's a list of comics. Look, comics exist. They're a thing and here they are. And when I asked questions like, what do I do with them? How do I teach them? Nobody had answers for it. So we all had to come up with these ideas on our own. And, this was just before the internet, right? So we were all kind of in a vacuum trying to figure it out in our classrooms. But now here we are with wonderful educators like yourselves who are sharing these strategies, advanced pedagogy, and real practical lessons that people can tear right out of your books, literally or figuratively, and utilize in their classroom. So that's I think a really great, huge step during the course of my career anyway. So young teachers coming into the field now really have an advantage if they want to use these types of texts. Thanks in no small part to the work that the two of you have done. So let's go back to Tim for the next question first. And I think I know the answer because, like I said, I follow you, but I'm sure a lot of people would be really interested. What was the most challenging part for you of actually writing, compiling, and editing the whole process of from soup to nuts getting this book done? What do you feel was the one thing or one of the biggest challenges for you during this process?
Yeah. Well, first you have all the years of experience in the classroom, and then, what do you include? What don't you include? There's that. And like Shveta said, like I pretty much had the book when I sent out my query letters. My book was pretty much done. Like I knew what I was going to do, and it was really, really hard to get back no for this reason and no for that. I mean, so many no's, and I literally had given up. I was like, all right, I tried. I'm proud of myself. And then, as everybody says, it takes one yes. And so Routledge was kind enough to say yes. And part of what helped them was knowing what I was going to do in the book. But in the midst of all this, we had a family situation, and so we decided we had to move our house in the middle of all this. And then, of course, COVID came. So we moved in the middle of COVID. And when we moved twice, I lost all of my notes, all of my cards, and all that kind of stuff. So we finally move into the new house, and then I get started again. And then my son, who's immune compromised, in November that year, I had to stay home full time because my school was opening back up again, and there was no virtual option for me there. And my kids could not go back to school then before the vaccines. And so that was tough. So being a stay-at-home dad to 3 kids full time, and all the depression and anxiety and everything that hits, I was done. And so I thought that was it. It was over. I missed my deadline. And it was people in the industry who I talked to who were like, dude, just ask for an extension. Like, sometimes things happen and we all have to do that. Like Gianfrancesco told me to do that, like JJK. And I was like, really? And so I did. And my editor's like, yeah, okay. Like, we understand life gets in the way and things happen. But it was just then sitting down, and that was it. Like, I typed it all out. But on top of all of that, I think the worst part was trying to get the image permissions to use in the book. And so there's a lot of great lessons that aren't in my book because some companies, let me just say there's DC lessons in there, but not from another famous comic book publisher, because they never got back to me. DC was great. DC was like, yeah, great. Yeah, no, we won't charge you. You can use like 10 or 15 images, go for it, no problem. But it was the constant emails and the back and forth. And like, one company wanted $200 just for me to include an image of the cover of the book. And I was paying for all the images out of my own pocket. Routledge didn't really have that budget for me to do those things. So I don't know, that's book 2, book 3, whatever it might be, is if I can get those permissions. But that takes so much time. And so I've got a deadline to face, and I've got a family to raise. And at some point, my editor and I were like, listen, let's just go with what we have. There's going to be stuff you're going to have to leave out because we don't have the permissions left. And just like I going through all that process, and then doing all the editing and things like that, and then getting the editing past my language arts teacher wife. She was great. She was brutal, marked a lot of stuff off, things that I did wrong. And then we fixed it all, and then we got it out.
Very intimidating, the thought of having to do all that. It's amazing that, considering everything that you went through, I commend you for pressing on and getting it done through the pandemic. And again, as you and I are friends in various social medias, I saw the issues with your son and your concern about the pandemic. And a lot of us were in that same place. I really felt for you then. And I'm glad to hear that you all weathered the storm well and you managed to come out on the other side okay. Shveta, same question for you. What do you feel was the most challenging part of your process?
Whew, well, it was challenging for me, but it was not like that. So I really, a lot of empathy for Tim's experience. And that is just such a thing to celebrate, that it's out in the world, Tim. And I think I did speak with you when I was reaching out to you to interview you for my book, that you had mentioned, I have this pending project too, and I'll have to delay it. And I said, oh, I think I remember telling you, well, mine was supposed to come out already months ago, and I'm working on the delayed release right now. So I had, other circumstances. I got the contract January 2020, the year COVID was going to hit in a few months. So COVID hit. I was a consultant, a contractor at the time. And so I basically lost all of my work that I was doing because schools no longer needed outside contractors to come in for professional learning. And so that was a big surprise. So I was out on the job market again during COVID unanticipatedly. And I also then found out I was pregnant with my second child. And so that was also another shock. So even more urgency to get back into a full-time, salaried position with benefits. And so I finally did that. I got a job at a school district near here that I was pretty excited about, but there was all of this transition, learning this new role. And it just was that I was no longer, my brain space was not, I was not being nourished and fueled and stimulated anymore by the idea of looking through all of my research and ideas and notes from the blog post I had written, that to compile that all into this massive manuscript. I just wasn't motivated anymore, and it wasn't really where I was getting my getting satisfied. I was really into learning this new job and this instructional content that I was now rolling out in this new school district. And so I contacted my publisher, and I was planning to quit and just cancel the contract and say, well, you know, that's not really where my priorities are right now. And they just wouldn't let me quit. They said, we think there's a lot of value here. We'd really like you to pursue this. We could be flexible with the deadline. How does it sound if we postpone it till this time? I said, well, you know, I do have winter break coming up. Maybe I can just make a lot of progress on it during winter break and then get back to my school job. So I did that. But I'll say the most challenging part, once I decided no longer to quit and that I had this support system of the publisher and the editor behind me, the hardest part then was moving from the reading and research and notes gathering and interviewing phase into the actual committing to, this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2, this is what's going to make it in, this is what's not going to make it in, and actually drafting it, so that you could just read forever. You could just keep reading more wonderful literature out there about how to teach with comics, or just, you know, actual comics research, academic research, close readings of actual comics, and just the comics themselves. You could just do that forever. So there was a time where you have to decide that you know enough, you have enough to articulate and add value. You're just moving the conversation forward a little bit. And there's always more books to write. There's always more topics to explore in articles, and in panels. So there was that. That was sort of the hardest part. It's like moving on to that commitment stage.
Thank you. I do have another question, but we do have a question from the audience. So before I ask my final question, since we are getting close to time here, I would on to Paul Warner from the chat has asked, what is your professional development like for educators? So I know each of you have done that. So really quickly, do you want to each kind of pitch a little of what you would do if you were brought into a school or an organization to offer PD? What would that look like for each of you? Shveta, do you want to start? And then we'll have Tim answer as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to craft it with the client or the school or the teachers seeking out the support. So it's, you know, highly customizable and adapted to local contexts. But in general, an overarching principle of it is getting the teachers to experience the content and curriculum and instructional strategies the way that their students ideally would. So I think can be a lot of hesitancy with, you know, non-millennial type teachers, or even younger teachers who don't have their own proclivities towards visual text. There's still a feeling of newness and strangeness. So getting them to interact with the content, with the text, the way that they would with their students, so that they immediately have that buy-in. So there's a lot of basic strategies I describe in the book that you could do on day one with students of any age level, but also they would apply to a professional learning environment with educators. Just so that they can immediately see the value of doing this kind of work. Like, oh, I thought I saw what was going on in this image, but now that I hear what everybody else saw, let me look at it again. Let me look at it more closely. So then the educators themselves are experiencing the kind of instruction and the benefits, and then they'll see, like, I want my students to experience that. If a light bulb moment went off for me, you know, I definitely want that for my kids. So now I'm ready to learn how. So that's one thing I'll say with how a lot of the professional learning can go.
How about you, Tim? What do you present when you visit schools and districts?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing that Shveta said. It's a lot of times it depends on what the district does. The thing I hate the most about the whole process is how much do you charge? Just tell me what your budget is and we can work. Like it's so awkward because I don't really respect myself in terms of like, oh, I could charge like, you know what I mean? You just don't know. But anyway, it could be sometimes like I can Skype in with the district for a half hour on my lunch and it's just like an idea sharing situation. Sometimes people will fly me out. And it'll be like a 3-4 hour type of a thing. And then that usually encompasses like an hour of me presenting in terms of like a background on comics and how to read comics, because a lot of adults have never read a comic. I mean, a lot of our students have never read a comic, and you really start basic and it takes away a lot of those fears. And then depending on who the audience is, if it's everybody or if it's just language arts or just science or just, and then you can kind of tailor it to all those things. So what's cool about that is, there's all these different types of things that people need. And so a lot of times that makes me do new research because I'm like, oh, I've never presented to just science teachers before. And so then I'll go and do a little bit more research. And then I'm always constantly learning with all that. But, and I'm sure Shveta is the same way, like the conversation continues after those professional development meetings. And so, through our websites and through the Facebook groups and through social media. And so I'll get an email from a teacher from like a year ago. Hey, I met you out here, or you were in my district, and I had a question about, and I love that stuff. And so you start to grow this professional community after, a year, 2 years after you met the people the first time.
Thank you for that. I do have one last question before we wrap up, and we one more time plug your books and your resources. What's next for each of you in terms of publishing? Are you working on additional new books, or if not, what are your professional, current situation goals at this point? Tim, do you want to start first?
Sure. So I just started being working with the University of Pennsylvania, and I work in their graduate studies program. My wife and I teach courses together. So comics have gone Ivy League, which is kind of cool. And we've used my book as the core text. And so I get to teach teachers, education students in graduate school from around Pennsylvania, but also around the world through those programs. So that's been really exciting. And so that's starting to open up other doors. I've started writing some comics, more on that to come. I'm really excited about that with the focus on using them in the humanities classroom, and just, continuing to work with like Scholastic and PBS and different publishers. But I also have some ideas for the book. But again, the amount of time that the books take, and it takes away, it's such a time suck away from everything else. So I imagine eventually there will be a book number 2, but right now I kind of need to put that part of that stress behind me and focus on some of these other things.
Oh, sounds like you got a lot going on. That's awesome to hear. Shveta, same question. What are you working on these days?
Well, I just started a new job yet again. And now I have an exciting position for the Oregon State government, for the Department of Ed here in Oregon. That's really focused on recruiting and retaining Oregon's new educator workforce, ensuring that our educators are culturally responsive teachers, creating inclusive classroom environments. So the scope is really big now, and we're talking about high leverage practices that can be scaled statewide. And so I am, sadly, moving beyond the scope of comics in the classroom, though that work will always inform what I do at the state level. But I do really miss that one-to-one partnership I described before. So I cherish whenever a teacher reaches out to me through the book or through a different article I've written to ask questions. And I just, again, like, it's not about cost or some prepackaged amount, but just it's how I get nourished, is to partner with teachers and grapple with big instructional questions and look at how curriculum and content is influencing student outcomes and just children. So always looking for those opportunities. But in terms of more writing, I am focusing now, like Tim says, books are such a big commitment that take away from all of the other things we can be doing. So I'm really satisfied right now with, I'm a regular contributor to Edutopia. They welcome a lot of creativity and space for educators to be writing about things to try in the classroom. I got to just actually turn one of my Edutopia articles into a little movie. You know, I've always wanted to be an actress, so I've kind of joked that like this was my Oscar moment. I actually have a movie I'm in. So so they took my article on using drawings in the classroom and turned it into one of their short instructional videos. So I'm really nourished by that community on Edutopia, and I'm sort of trying to get content out through those means instead of devoting that whole years or more of time to writing a book. But who knows, we'll see what I'm doing next year.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're staying in education, even if you are leaving the classroom. It's with the state of education now, losing teachers is a big problem for education in general. So glad to hear that you're still doing the good work of education at the state level. That's great. So really quick, I know we're over a little over time, but I still want to make sure that we get the chance to plug your books one last time. So just one more time here. Tim Smyth's book is Teaching with Comics and Graphic Novels. It's available from the Routledge website as well as Amazon. You can pick it up anytime, get it in 2 days if you have Prime. Shveta's book, Hacking Graphic Novels, also available through, what's the publisher website on that, Shveta? Is it just
Times 10 Publications, or the Hack Learning series has its own website, but also available on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon. To find both Shveta and Tim online, Tim's got his great, very, very, very robust website, historycomics.net, which has tons of resources for educators for free. So a lot of really great personal insight from Tim about being in the classroom. His Twitter and Instagram are at History Comics. I very, very heartily recommend you follow him because you will get a lot of posts. Tim is, I don't know how he has the time to post as much as he does, but he does, and it's always gold. Shveta, her website, shvetamiller.com, her Twitter, again, please follow her, Shveta Miller. You'll get her insight on education, and she also asked to share her LinkedIn there, linkedin.com/Shveta Miller. So I want to thank one more time, I want to thank our panelists, Tim Smyth, Shveta Miller. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon on a Saturday to talk with us and sharing your experiences. Thanks to those who have attended, and thanks to Pixton for sponsoring this event, and thanks to the good people at Reading with Pictures, which includes me. So I guess I'm thanking myself in a very weird meta way, and the other members of the committee that helped put this together. Please make sure you stick around, because right now, starting right now, is Amy Chu's EndNote keynote that's happening right now. So jump out of here and jump into there, because you're not going to want to miss what Amy has to say. She's another amazing creator that we've all worked with. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Shveta and Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to talk with you.
You too. Bye-bye.